He was once the most recognizable face on television, a man whose runaway character captivated the entire country. Yet behind that gripping chase was a real-life story, far more intense than anything written for the screen. David Janssen rose fast, burned bright, and then disappeared so suddenly that fans were left stunned for decades. What happened to him was not only unexpected, it revealed a side of fame that few ever see, and even fewer survive. And the truth behind his final years still raises questions that have never fully settled. David Janssen's story began far from Hollywood, in the quiet town of Naponi, Nebraska. Born David Harold Meyer, he grew up with a mix of small-town simplicity and a family dynamic that changed early. His parents separated when he was young, and his mother, Bernice, moved him to Los Angeles to start a new life. She had performed as a Ziegfeld girl years before, and she carried with her a belief that her son could succeed in a world most people only dreamed about. That move placed David in the heart of the industry he would one day dominate. He attended Fairfax High School, where his talent began to show. He did not have the loud personality of many young performers, but he carried himself with a calm confidence that set him apart. People later said he had a sort of quiet intensity, the kind that made you watch him even when he was not speaking. By his teenage years, he was already appearing in small film roles, slowly learning how sets worked and how to hold attention without forcing it. When he was 18, he enlisted in the United States Army and served for 2 years. The discipline he gained there later shaped his work ethic, and it is one reason directors said he could handle demanding shooting schedules that would break other actors. After his service, he returned to Hollywood, determined to build a real career. Around that time, he took his stepfather's surname, becoming David Janssen, the name that would eventually be known around the world. His first major break arrived when he landed the lead role in the television series Richard Diamond, Private Detective. It was a stylish show about a smooth, witty detective, and viewers quickly connected with Janssen's understated charm. He was not flashy, but he felt real, and that authenticity made the character stand out in an era filled with larger-than-life television heroes. The role opened doors that had been closed for years, and suddenly he was no longer a hopeful newcomer. He was a rising star. That early success set the stage for a transformation he could never have predicted. Because just a few years later, one role would appear that would redefine his entire life and change television history in the process. When David Janssen accepted the role of Dr. Richard Kimball in The Fugitive in 1963, he stepped into a world far different from any part he had played before. The character was a respected physician suddenly accused of ending his own wife's life, a man thrown into chaos, forced to run, forced to live in shadows, and forced to prove a truth no one believed. It was a bold concept for its time. Television then was filled with neat resolutions and simple heroes, but The Fugitive offered something far more human, and Janssen, with his weary eyes and quiet intensity, became the perfect vessel for that complexity. The show's premise created an emotional anchor that pulled viewers in week after week. Audiences did not just follow Dr. Kimball's escape from town to town, they followed his fear, his moral dilemmas, and the sense that a single mistake could end everything. Janssen carried that weight in a way that felt almost effortless, even though those close to him said the role pushed him harder than anything he had done before. His performance was grounded, subtle, and deeply personal. He made silence speak louder than dialogue, a rare gift in an era where most shows relied heavily on exposition. Behind the scenes, however, the workload was brutal. Janssen filmed long days, often 6 days a week, with demanding scenes that placed him in harsh weather, long night shoots, and constant physical movement. He was a perfectionist, but he also shouldered the emotional intensity of the role in a way that followed him home. Cast and crew members later said he looked exhausted even at the start of a shooting day, leaning heavily on cigarettes and coffee to keep himself going. Some recalled that he would leave the set only to drive around aimlessly before heading home, as if he needed time to shake off the character he carried for so many hours. The emotional strain may have been heavy, but it paid off in ways no one expected. Viewers connected with the show on a level that shocked even its producers. They wrote letters describing how Kimball's struggle mirrored their own fears, or how the show made them question the nature of justice. It was not just entertainment, it was a conversation about the world. And Janssen, without flashy monologues or dramatic gestures, became a symbol of the quiet man pushed beyond his limits. Everything reached a breaking point in August 1967, when the two-part finale aired. It became one of the most watched television events in the world at that time. Families gathered around living room screens, counting down the minutes to see whether Dr. Kimball would finally confront the mysterious one-armed man and clear his name. The anticipation was electric, and when the resolution finally came, millions felt they had reached the end of the journey themselves. It was not simply a finale, it was a moment in television history. But the success created a trap. The world now saw David Janssen as Dr. Kimball, the man on the run. And once the cameras stopped rolling, he discovered that escaping that image would be far more difficult than anything written into the show. He had climbed to the top, but he was beginning to understand what it meant to be defined by a single role. And as he pushed into new projects, he realized that fame can open doors, but it can also quietly close others. When The Fugitive ended, many people believed David Janssen's career would only climb higher. He had just led one of the most successful television series of the decade, earned critical respect, and proven he could carry enormous emotional weight as a leading man. But stepping out of Dr. Kimball's shadow proved far more complicated than anyone expected. Hollywood remembered him, but it did so through a narrow lens. Producers and studios still saw him as the desperate man on the run, and breaking away from that identity became an uphill battle. Janssen knew he had to show range, so he turned toward films. He accepted roles that were a clear departure from the hunted doctor, including a part in The Green Berets alongside John Wayne. It was a major film with a massive audience, and Janssen hoped it would allow people to see him in a new light. But even in that large production, the public's perception of him did not fully shift. Many viewers walked away, still referring to him as the Fugitive, a reminder of the character that had become both his greatest triumph and his most stubborn limitation. Still, he refused to surrender to typecasting. Throughout the late 1960s and early 1970s, he took on a string of film and television roles. Some offered him the chance to stretch his abilities, diving into characters who were complex, flawed, and often caught in moral struggles. But Hollywood was changing quickly. New faces were taking center stage, new genres were emerging, and audience tastes were shifting toward younger, edgier stars. Janssen, who had dominated the early era of dramatic television, now had to compete with a generation that benefited from a fresh cultural tone. His determination did pay off at moments. One of his most respected roles came in the series Harry O, where he played a private investigator recovering from injuries that forced him to rethink everything about his profession. It was grounded, thoughtful, and perfectly suited to his understated style. Critics praised the show, calling it one of his most mature performances. Yet despite that respect, the series never reached the same commercial success as The Fugitive. It built a loyal following, but it could not recapture the widespread excitement he once commanded. There was a pattern forming beneath the surface. Janssen worked tirelessly, often jumping from set to set, giving every role more than what the scripts required. But the industry he re-entered after The Fugitive was not the same one that had first embraced him. Television was evolving into bolder formats, and movies were leaning toward faster pacing, younger casts, and stylized action. Janssen still had the talent, but the market had moved in a direction that made it harder for actors like him to stay in the spotlight. His personal life began to reflect the strain. The long hours, constant pressure, and emotional intensity pushed him toward habits that slowly became central to his daily routine. Friends and colleagues later described the same picture: an actor who smoked heavily, drank more than he should, and ignored the warning signs of a body under constant stress. He looked older than his years, and even in casual photos from that time, you can see the exhaustion in his expression. He had climbed high, but the effort of staying there was taking a visible toll. Yet beneath every challenge, he never stopped chasing the next role that might redefine him. He kept moving, kept working, and kept believing he could break free from the shadow of Dr. Kimball. But just as he seemed ready to enter a new phase of his career, something much deeper was quietly unfolding behind the scenes, a struggle that would soon change his life in ways no one expected. While David Janssen fought to reshape his career on screen, his personal life grew increasingly complicated off-screen. Fame had brought him financial stability and industry influence, but it also created tensions that few people saw. His first marriage, to Ellie Graham, began with strong affection and high hopes. They married long before he became a household name, and she supported him during years when acting jobs were not guaranteed. But when The Fugitive transformed him into a national figure, the pressure of that sudden fame settled heavily on their relationship. Long hours, travel, and the emotional weight of portraying a hunted man blurred the boundaries between his work life and his home life. Ellie later said that he became distant without realizing it. He was physically present, but mentally drained. He often came home exhausted, still carrying the lingering stress of the character he lived inside for so many hours each day. Their marriage began to strain under the uneven rhythm of television production, and by the mid-1960s, the cracks were impossible to ignore. Rumors spread about his closeness with co-star Suzanne Pleshette, and although neither publicly revealed the full truth, those whispers only added pressure to an already fragile union. In 1968, after 10 years of marriage, they divorced. The end of that marriage should have provided him room to breathe, but instead, it exposed just how much he had been suppressing. Friends noticed that his habits became more intense. He smoked constantly, sometimes going through several packs a day. He drank heavily, especially during long breaks between projects, using it as a way to unwind after pushing himself too hard for too long. His charisma and sense of humor made him a favorite guest at gatherings. But behind the laughter, he carried a heaviness that never seemed to leave him. Even in public appearances, the change was noticeable. Photos from the late 1960s and early 1970s show a man who looked older than his age. His face, once youthful and sharp, began to show signs of exhaustion and stress. He often appeared with dark circles beneath his eyes, a result of both hard work and restless nights. Those who worked with him said he rarely slept more than a few hours at a time. He poured everything into his roles, but the toll it took on his health was becoming impossible to ignore. In 1975, he married actress Danny Crane, a woman who understood the pressures of the industry and cared deeply for him. Their marriage brought stability back into his life, but even she admitted that David carried a kind of internal tension that never fully relaxed. He loved deeply, but worried constantly. He worked passionately, but pushed himself past limits without hesitation. Despite her efforts to create a calm home environment, the demons he battled, exhaustion, anxiety, and the relentless pressure to maintain a fading spotlight, followed him everywhere. Through all of this, the industry offered little room for rest. He stayed busy, acting in television movies, appearing in guest roles, and taking on characters that required emotional depth. But the combination of constant work and constant stress quietly weakened his body. Doctors encouraged him to slow down, to rest, to change his habits before they did irreversible damage. He listened, but only partly. His drive to stay relevant and to keep proving himself made it difficult to step away. And with Hollywood shifting rapidly, he felt he could not afford to lose momentum. What made his struggle so tragic was how hidden it remained. Fans saw a strong, confident actor who seemed capable of handling anything. But behind that image was a man whose health was deteriorating far faster than anyone realized. And as the 70s drew to a close, those private battles were about to collide with fate in a way no one could have predicted. because the next chapter of his life would arrive not with a slow decline, but with a single devastating moment that shocked everyone who knew him. By the late 1970s, David Janssen appeared steady and active, still taking on roles that demanded emotional weight. But behind that familiar confidence, his health had been eroding for years. The long workdays, constant travel, heavy smoking, and endless pressure quietly pushed his body toward a breaking point. Those around him noticed the signs, yet he rarely slowed down. He kept telling himself that once he finished the next project, he would rest. But there was always another script, another shoot, another commitment that tugged him forward. In early 1980, he was filming the television movie Father Damien, the leper priest. It was a demanding role with long hours, and even though he looked exhausted, he pushed through every day on set. Friends later said his energy seemed far lower than usual, and he struggled with shortness of breath. Still, he refused to step back. Work had always been his way of staying grounded, and the idea of pausing made him uneasy. On February 13, 1980, everything ended without warning. Just before dawn, at his Malibu home, Janssen collapsed. He was only 48 years old. Paramedics arrived quickly, but the heart attack was massive, leaving no chance for recovery. For fans, the news was almost unbelievable. The man who had spent years escaping danger on screen had been lost in an instant, and the suddenness of it left people stunned. Hollywood paused to take in the loss of someone who had once been one of television's most commanding figures. The autopsy revealed severe heart damage and major arterial blockage, clear signs of the lifestyle he had carried for years. Those who knew him best said he always underestimated the strain he placed on himself, believing he could push through anything as he had done throughout his career. But this time, his body simply could not keep up with the pace he demanded. Tributes filled newspapers and television broadcasts. Co-stars described him as sharp, generous, and deeply committed to his craft. Directors praised his professionalism, saying he could elevate even the simplest scenes. Fans wrote letters recalling how they grew up watching him, how The Fugitive had become a shared experience in homes across the country. Yet, beneath the sadness was a sense of unfinished business. Janssen had spoken about wanting a fresh chapter in the 1980s, with roles that reflected his maturity and the quieter strength he had gained. That chapter never arrived. His final, incomplete project became a symbol of everything he still had left to give. A second wave of grief came from the realization that he had never truly escaped the pressure that followed him since the height of The Fugitive. And as the industry moved forward, many wondered how different things might have been if he had slowed down or taken the warning signs more seriously. David Janssen's death did more than mark the end of a career. It marked the end of an era. He had shaped a generation of television storytelling, only to vanish at a time when it seemed he still had more to uncover. And in the quiet that followed, people began to ask a question that would linger for decades. Why did someone so iconic fade so quickly from the spotlight? In the years after David Janssen's passing, his legacy settled into an unusual place. He had shaped one of the most influential television shows ever made, yet his name slowly drifted from public memory. Part of that was timing. Hollywood shifted rapidly in the 80s, and younger stars filled the screens he once dominated. Television also changed its storytelling style, moving toward louder, faster, and more sensational formats that overshadowed the quiet strength Janssen was known for. Still, his influence never vanished completely. The Fugitive continued to inspire writers and producers, especially its record-breaking finale, which proved that audiences were eager for long-form stories with emotional stakes. His star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame remained a reminder of how deeply he once impacted viewers. And in recent years, classic television fans have begun revisiting his work, rediscovering the subtle power he brought to every role. Rumors and discussions continue among loyal followers. Questions about how his lifestyle affected his final years and what direction his career might have taken had he lived longer. Many believe he was on the edge of a late career reinvention. The the kind that could have introduced him to a new generation. But history had other plans, and because of that, his story carries a quiet, bittersweet weight.